I just want to welcome, he's an engineer, he's a man of God, he is an advisor, he wears many hats. Many of you know him. I think he's a father, he is a brother, wearing very many hats. But I think the most important one this evening is to say, when I look at him, he is a man that has been graced with wisdom, and it is that wisdom that we want to tap into this evening. So, welcome, Baba. You are welcome, and I just want to hand over the platform to you. This today, we're just going to do it a little bit different. We're going to give you about 30 minutes to just speak to us and be free, be open. Speak to us from the heart, speak to us from the words, whatsoever, howsoever you are moved to speak to us. And then maybe after 30, 35, 40 minutes, I'll then come back, and if there are questions, please put them into the comment section. Then we will come back and address some of the questions, real life questions that people might be facing and needing guidance or encouragement for. So thank you very much, Baba, and I want to hand over this time to you.
Thank you so much. You're always a wonderful thing and a wonderful time to be invited to a platform like this and speak to so many people and speak to everybody concerning what is happening in life. And so I very much feel honored to be part of the platform today. And as you gave me a mandate that I must speak about living beyond a dark season. And I think that it is a very, very important and pertinent subject that we need to all look into and speak about even in this season. And now, even as you have said it correctly, I know that when we are talking about living beyond a dark season, what is in everybody's mind when we are talking about a dark season is the COVID situation. And yes, while the COVID situation is the season that we have right here at hand, but I would want everybody to know that as we speak tonight, I'm not just going to focus only mainly on the COVID situation, because when we are talking about a dark season, in other words, we can say it's about a crisis. We're talking about a crisis, and a crisis can be personal. A crisis can be a family crisis. It can be a national crisis, and it can be a global crisis. We know that in 2008 we also suffered another crisis, which was the 2008 economic crisis, where the world, most of us were grown up already, were in the workplace. You saw how the world suffered when the markets collapsed in the United States of America, and the rest of the world suffered the battle, sometimes not immediately, but over a period of time. I'll share with you a story just now about how I was personally impacted by that crisis that took place in 2008. And so crisis can be at a personal level. I know so many people that are being challenged at a personal level. It can be a health crisis, it can be a financial crisis, it can be a marital crisis, it can be just chaos that is taking place in your personal life. And then it can be a national one. I'm Zimbabwean, and we know we've been challenged in many ways for a long time. And that's a national crisis. And obviously, when we talk about the pandemic, it's a global crisis. So when we're talking about crisis and the dark season that we are talking about, I don't want us to limit ourselves just to the global pandemic of the coronavirus, because some were impacted and some saw from a distance. So while yes, it is the talk of the day today, but I want us to just look more at a personal level on how we can benefit on moving forward through any crisis that we might face in our lives. And so before I get into details and explaining about a crisis and what it is and how we can ourselves able to live beyond the dark season, especially with the one which we are still just coming out of. I know we are not yet out of the woods as far as the coronavirus is concerned. There's a lot of slowdown. The positive cases are going down, the deaths are going down, and everything around the coronavirus is going down, but we're still not yet out of the woods. So while, yes, it is the talk for now, but I want us to have our minds a lot much more open in terms of looking at ourselves in this situation. Now, I just mentioned about the crisis that took place in 2008, which was a global economic crisis that came out of the crash of the financial markets in the United States of America. I don't want to go into those details, but what I want to say is that around about that time, I had a very wonderful career. And I was working as one of the youngest executives in the diamond mining industry, and I was a general manager and chief executive of a junior diamond miner. and really at the peak of my career and enjoying the fruits of being an executive and making executive decisions. Not only was it like that, but I was in a bit of a unique situation because apart from just being the youngest executive in the diamond mining industry, I also was one of the youngest and black um, engineers that had been entrusted with building up a diamond mine from scratch and trying to build it into production and making it a success. And so I've been able to do that and get turn the diamond mine into a success. And while I was enjoying that part of my career, which I will always look back and say that it made me, it formed me, and it changed my whole profession even up to today. While everything was moving so well, there was the economic crisis that took place in 2008. And when it came to Africa, it was a ripple effect, which means in Africa, we didn't feel the impact of the economic crisis right there in 2008, but a few years later. And so, due to exactly the same crisis, the diamond price and the diamond demand went down. And our mine, being a junior miner, it was not spared from the crisis. We began to struggle on viability. We began to struggle in terms of the demand of the diamonds and the efficiencies also of producing the diamond from the ground. Everything just began to work against us, and we tried what we can to keep the diamond mine moving until we get to a place where it was no longer economically viable. And when it was no longer economically viable, the decision was to mothball the mine. And while the decision was to close the mine was made, the my principals that I was reporting to gave me a 24-hour notice that my services at the mine were no longer required. And so it means within 24 hours, I was falling from being a hero to being a zero. And within 24 hours, I saw my life changing from being this top flying young black executive at the helm of a diamond mine just to being out there without a title and without a job. It was quite a very difficult and a very challenging time for me because I went out of that situation and I went back home. Yes, on the one side, we have so many projects that were already on that were going on, but I've not been directly involved in those, and so it means that I just found myself living from that position, going out there onto the streets. And for the next few months, I found myself going on an emotional tailspin where my life just emotionally I began to go down and down and down. And for so many months, for weeks on end, and for months on end, I could not sleep. I would find myself sleeping in the middle of the night, and I'm sweating and I'm having nightmares because I was wondering how am I going to pay the bills? What is the future going to look like? I'm feeling stuck. And each time I would sleep like that, I would see my wife was sleeping so peacefully and enjoying her sleep. But when she wakes up in the middle of the night, she would see me just counting, looking at the ceiling and counting the holes on the ceiling and sweating and struggling with myself. And so this went on for months and months. Now it's battling like 6 months from the time that I left the job, and I was just going into an emotional tailspin and just seeing no way of moving forward from there. So one day, when my wife saw it that I was the man that used to be a hero of his life or of her life was going on an emotional tailspin and was losing control of his own life, she one day in the middle of the night woke up and she saw me in that situation, drenching in sweat and afraid and worrying about the life and about the future. And she held me quite firmly, by the collar of my shirt while I was in bed. And she shook me violently. And she says, you see, the problem is that while everybody else sees value in you, you cannot see value in yourself. Why is it that you're going on an emotional tailspin when there is so much value inside of you where you can rise up and do something with your life? And that speaking that took place on that day changed, did it for me. It changed my whole view. Immediately, I understood the kind of value that was inside of me. Immediately, it changed my approach to the situation that was standing right before me, where I was going in an emotional tailspin and losing control because of an event that had taken place in my life. And the event is that I had lost my job at a time that I least expected the job. And it looked to me as if the life had come to an end. And so for me, I keep speaking this story because it reflects or represents a season in my life when I was in a crisis that almost got me into a total emotional tailspin and total loss of control of my emotions, of my life, and also changed the way I was viewing life. And when I look at that, I also know that there are a whole lot of many people that find themselves in situations like that. It might not be directly related to a job, but it might be directly related to a marriage where you can find yourself, the husband is just walked away from you, and suddenly your whole emotions are going in an emotional tailspin. Or the crisis that we've just come out of, the pandemic, the corona crisis, that we are not yet completely out of the woods, as I say, but this crisis we know we've just experienced a few months where it was really intense here in Southern Africa. But when we have gone through this, a lot of us are coming out of this emotionally bruised after we have lost colleagues, we have lost friends, we have lost all sorts of people around us. And for us, it was a bleak period, a dark season where a lot of people begin to look at their lives and say, what next? And they begin to think that it's better to die and not be there. So that is a crisis. So crises will show themselves to each and every one of us in different ways. Dark seasons will reveal or manifest themselves in our lives in different ways. It could be loss of job, it could be a health crisis, or you discover suddenly that you have got cancer, stage 2 or stage 3 or stage 4, or a loved one, your parent is in that situation, or crisis can show itself in a marriage crisis, as I've already said. It can be in friends, friends walking away from you. It can be in school, flunking from school, getting results that you never expected. So what I want to say is that when we're talking about a dark season or when we're talking about a crisis, we all face crisis in different ways. But what is important that I want to bring across to you right now is that is for each and every one of us to know that crises are a fact of life. Crises are a fact of life. They will happen to each and every one of us. And I want you to know that because crises are a fact of life, we might have been through a crisis, or somebody who is listening to me today might actually be going through a crisis, or you might not have been through a crisis or going through a crisis right now, but there might be a crisis that you might experience sometime in the near future. So each and every one of us, it is important that we may listen to what I'm going to be talking to you today. The other point I want you to know is that a crisis is not permanent. Crises are not permanent, but even though they are a part of life, but they are not permanent, they are seasonal. So now the Bible says, if you go to the book of Genesis chapter 8 and verse 22, that it is a story when Noah had just come out of the ark. You remember the time of the flood, and Noah was in the ark with the animals, and then Noah came out of the ark at the end of so many days, and then he went out on dry ground, and he built an altar for the Lord to thank him for having saved his life. And after he built an altar, God spoke to Noah, and he said something important. We see this in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 22. God spoke to Noah, and he said, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, will not cease. That is what God spoke to Noah. He says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest. Now you see in this moment, immediately after Noah was coming out of the flood, God spoke, and he spoke about seasons. And he says, as long as the earth will be there, there will be seasons. There will be seed time, there will be harvest time. There will be cold, there will be heat, there will be summer, there will be winter. So God established seasons, which means that our lives will always go through seasons. You might go through a seed time or a harvest time. You might go through winter, you will go through summer. You might go through the night time, you will experience daytime. So it doesn't matter what season you are in now. I want you to know that there is no season that is permanent, or there is no crisis that is permanent. All crises are seasonal. So for that reason, don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary situation. Don't make a permanent decision in your life based on a temporary crisis. I was heartbroken last week, and a friend of mine told me about a cousin that had just taken his life, and he killed himself, young man, and was doing well in his job. He made a mistake at work, and for some reason felt so embarrassed and decided to overdose himself with tablets. So out of a temporary failure, he decided to make a permanent decision of killing himself. Now, I want to say it doesn't matter what crisis you might be going through, whether it's a problem in the marriage, problem in your health, problem in your job, problem economically or your finances or anything. Never make a permanent decision based on a temporary situation that you may be going through, because crises are seasons and seasons are cyclical. Each and every one of us will go up and down in our lives. So success in our lives is determined by how we manage ourselves from peak to peak. But we can't go from peak to peak without passing through a valley. So we need to ensure that we make sure we take gains on the straights when we remain in control on the curves and on the bends. We take gains when we are on the peaks, and we make sure that we remain in control when we are in the valleys of our lives. So God established the seasons. So crises are part of the seasons that God established in our lives. The second thing that I want you to know is whatever crisis you might face in your life, even while we are all of us just coming through this pandemic, coronavirus pandemic, remember we're going to be talking about how we survive, how we go forward past the dark seasons. But I want us to lay the platform first. So I want you to know, as number two, that crisis that we go through do not change God. The seasons of our lives do not change God. When you are, whether you're on the peak or you are in the valley of your life, it does not change the nature, the quality, and the character of God. Our crisis and the seasons that we go through, coronavirus, does not change the nature of God, does not change the love of God towards your life, does not change the protection that God has over your life. So I want you to know that crises and dark seasons in our lives, they don't change God. The Bible says in the book of First Kings chapter 20 and verse 28, I'll just paraphrase that scripture. It says that the God of the mountains is also the God of the valleys. At that point, there were some Armenians, that wanted to come against Israel, the Israelites. And so God was looking at them, and he says, look at those people, they don't understand. They think that the God of Israel is not the God of the valleys, but is only the God of the mountains. And so God was establishing himself, and he says, as much as I'm the God of the mountains, I'm also the God of the valleys. So I want you to know, when you go through a crisis, that the God of the mountains is also the God of the valleys, which means the same God that you celebrate and praise, hallelujah, jump and shout hallelujah up and down when you have been promoted, is the same God that is there for you when you have been fired from your job. The same God that you will shout and lift up your legs and do somersault in celebration when you are in good health is the same God that is watching over you when you have got stage 4 cancer in your life. The same God that when you get married and you're celebrating is there watching over you, is the same God that is there with you when your husband is walking away from you, as long as you remain faithful in understanding that God is never changed by the crisis. I want you to know that the same God that was with Jesus when he was raising Lazarus from the dead is the same God that was watching on Jesus when he was being crucified on the cross. He never shifted his position. He never changed his love and his disposition towards us as his creation. So I want to establish this right at the onset, that crises do not change God. So when you find yourself even at the depth of a crisis, even this corona pandemic or whatever it is, I want you to always remember God is not changed by our situations. They don't change who he is, and they don't change his love. And so the God of the mountains is also the God of the valleys. He is with you everywhere. And when you are in that situation, I also want you to remember that when you go through the valleys of your life, God does not forsake you, but he is still there with you. I just want to establish here the platform so that we can talk about how we move forward from the dark season. But I want to establish here, you might be still going through a crisis right now. I want you to know that the God of the mountains is the God of the valleys. And when you are in the valley, he is with you. Why do I say so? The Bible says in Psalm 23 and verse 4, it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You see, so here is a man of God, David, who had had a personal and a quality relationship with God. And he is speaking there out of experience. And he is saying, even though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, brothers and sisters, the loneliest place to ever be in is in the shadow of death. I want you to know, at the point of death, you can't be with your mother, you can't be with your children, you can't be with your husband or your wife. The loneliest place is the point of death, because it's you and you alone. It's your spirit facing the Creator at that point. So it's the loneliest place in the world. There is no amount of money that can deliver you from that position of loneliness. But I want you to know that David, with all his experience and mighty and wisdom, he says, even though I walk through that loneliest point, the valley of the shadow of death, he says, I will fear no evil. Why? Because your rod and your staff, they comfort me. What does that mean? It means even at the lowest point of his life, he had the assurance of the preservation and the protection of God in his life. So I want you to know, the only way you can survive in a crisis is for you to have in your life the assurance of the presence of God in your life. The assurance that even though I am lonely, there is nobody who understands. I speak to a lot of people and they say to me, you don't understand me. Nobody understands me. Nobody seems to understand me. So many people say things like that. But I want you to know, yes, I may not understand you, but there is one who understands you. It's God. He created you. So when you are in that place at the lowest point of your life, He is there with you. You must always have an assurance of His presence. That is what will keep you. If you go through a crisis where it looks like your world is falling apart and is crashing all over you, when you are in that situation, I want you to always remember, hold on. Now, this brings me to a story of what happened to my life that I remember so well and so vividly. Many years ago, just when I was just about to finish university, a friend of mine was working for the mines. I'd never been in a mine before. He was working for a gold mine, an underground mine. So he invited me to come and visit so that I can see how an underground mine looks like. So I visited him in a place called Gwanda. And I was just a young engineer. I'd never been on a mine. And so he says, I want to take you and show you how it looks like underground. And so he took me, we went into a cage, and then we went down a pit, a hole. And that cage, we're hanging on a string, went all the way down over 100, about 100 or 200 meters, all the way down into the hole. And when we got there about 200 meters at the bottom, the cage opened its doors and we walked out. And when we walked out, we went about 100 meters into the dark with just a little lighting in that tunnel. And when we went there, about 100 meters, we saw a little, like a red wall at the top that was going up, where there was a small, tiny cat ladder. The hole was just about a meter in diameter, if I'm not mistaken, or slightly bigger than that. And then so my friend says to me, so we are going to climb up about 30 to 50 meters up to the next level, And I was just in the middle of nowhere. So he says, okay, what we'll do is that I will go in front and you will be behind me. So we went up a cat ladder vertically upwards. In the middle of nowhere, remember we'd gone 200 meters down, 100 meters that way. Now we're climbing up the cat ladder up slowly. Now, as we were climbing in the middle, about 20 meters up, and there it was dark, no lighting, nothing. Suddenly there was a big siren. And so my friend was on top. He stood still. And I was behind, also climbing the cat ladder, and I stood still. And that noise, it was a big siren. And then my friend did not explain to me what was happening. He simply said, let's wait here. And then he said the next thing, whatever happens, never let go of the ladder. Hold tight. He says, whatever happens, whatever you see or feel, whatever happens, don't let go of the ladder. And that's all he told me. And so my heart was pounding, just like that. I didn't know what was about to happen. In the next few minutes, I heard the loudest bang that I'd never heard my whole life. And the whole place shook. And some little stones began to fall, from the top. And I began to utter my last prayers, because remember, we were 200 meters down, 100 meters that way, and a few meters up, and it was dark. We're in a red hole, and right in the middle of the earth. And the little stones were coming, the earth was shaking, and I said, I am dead, I am buried. My parents will never see me again. It is finished right here. And I was offering my last prayers and, repenting so that I am ready to face my Creator. Later on, I learned that what was happening there, it was a normal blasting operation that was taking place in the mind, and what we were doing was a normal procedure for blasting. But because I was a novice, it was my first time in the mine, I did not know. So that whole blast, it appeared to me like the world was shaking and I was getting buried right there. But what saved me on that day is the words that my friend spoke to me. He said, whatever happens, never let go of the ladder. Because if he had not told me that, with the whole shaking that took place, I would have panicked and I would have let go of the ladder and I would have fallen down to my death. So what saved my life was that I heed to his advice. Whatever happens, the world might shake, never let go of the ladder. So now I hold on to that saying. Why? Because I want to say it exactly to you. Whatever you are going through, crisis, whether it's a pandemic, corona, whether it's a marital crisis, economic or financial crisis, might be a health crisis, I want to give you one advice. Whatever you might go through, never let go of the ladder, never let go of the cross, never let go of Jesus Christ, because he is going to be your salvation. The earth and the world around you might shake as if it's going to bury you alive, but don't let go of the cross. Whatever you will go through, people and friends may walk away, family members may walk away, husbands or wives may walk away, employers or employees may walk away, friends and the people that you least expect may walk away, and your world might look like it's collapsing right on you. But I want you to always remember, never let go of the cross. That will save your life if the world looks like it's crashing and collapsing on you, in Jesus' name. So it might happen to many of us as we go through seasons of our lives that we get into those situations, but keep holding, because like I have already said, all crises are seasonal. Time heals. Just give it time, you will go through it, you will get your healing. As we can see, as we look behind, we can see that we are slowly moving away from the time when we're at the depth of this crisis that we've just been through. We pray that it will be completely disappeared from our lives, but we can look back and we can tell the story. Time heals and crises are seasonal. So while you go through a season that appears like it's the darkest moment of your life, don't let go of the cross. Now, I want you to just take you forward. I was just laying the ground about a crisis, that it's seasonal, it's temporary. It was established by, the seasons were established by God, and that when we go through these seasons and crises, we must always remember to look for the assurance of the presence of God, because he says that when you go through the valley of the shadow of death, you should fear no evil, because his rod and his staff will comfort you. Now, looking forward, how do you respond? How do we survive and how do we move forward? We've just come out of this pandemic and this crisis, and or when we are still in the depth of it, what do we do? I want to just give you just a few pointers. Number one, I want you to remember that when we are in a crisis, doing nothing is not an option. When you are in a crisis, and when we are coming out of a crisis, or when you are in a crisis, doing nothing is not an option. You know, when the children of Israel, they got to the Red Sea, in front of them was the sea that was flooded. Behind them were the Egyptian armies that were coming towards them. And on the sides was the desert that was surrounding them. So they were in a crisis because there was nowhere to go. When they were in that season, what happened is that Moses responded according to how he understood the world. And so he uttered something that is very, very common, that we say so much today as Christians. So Moses said to the children of Israel, he says, be still and see the deliverance, of the Lord. That's what Moses said when before the Red Sea, the Egyptian army was coming, surrounded by the desert. So Moses spoke to them and he says, be still and see the deliverance of the Lord. You see, that, and he says, the army you see, the Egyptians that you see today, you shall see them no more. So God, Moses responded to the crisis the way he understood. But you will see, if you read the scriptures, immediately God spoke to them and said, why do you stand still? That was what God says. He says, why do you stand still? Rise up and march towards the test. And he said to he instructed Moses, you must, with the rod, and do the action and part the Red Sea. So God was saying, don't stand still. Move, march forward towards the Red Sea. Moses, lift up your rod, strike on the water, and the waters will part. So I want you to know, when you have a crisis in front of you, doing nothing is not an option. In the book of 2 Kings chapter 7, from verses 3 and 4, there is a story there of the lepers, the 4 lepers. There was a crisis and a famine in Israel. And during that time of crisis and famine in Israel, what happened is that the 4 lepers, because they were lepers, they were not allowed in the camp. So they were they were put outside of the camp. And because there was a famine in the camp, there was no food. And in front of them was the army camp, the enemy army that had camped just behind so that they can bring an attack. So they were in between. And so after a few days of the crisis, they stood up and asked themselves and says, should we stay here until we die? And then they weighed their options. They had 3 options. They said, option number 1, let's go back into the village to everybody else. And they said, but there is a famine there. We will not survive, number 1. Number 2, we are lepers. We are not allowed in the community. So they will slaughter us. And so they said, okay, option number 2, let's remain where we are. And then they said, that won't help us, because when we remain in this place, nothing changes. So we got to do something. So doing nothing is not an option. So can I say to you, when it's a dark season for your life, doing nothing is not an option. Don't sit, don't just stand, but you have to rise up and do something about your situation. So the lepers stood up and they said, let's go down to the enemy camp, be an adventure that might save us. So as they began to move, God made a miracle. And when they moved, the enemy army, they had as if it was a mighty army and horses and chariots that was marching towards them. So they left their tents and they fled away. When the lepers got to that place, they had so much food, they ate their fill, and they went and called the rest of their brethren to say, come and eat. So what saved them is that they went on the offensive. So if you are in a crisis, don't stand in the defensive and have a pity party and feel sorry for yourself. But if you are in a crisis, rise up and do something about your situation. Be on the offense. If you have lost your job, don't sit there and cry tears. Crying tears will not change your situation. Cry one day, number 1. After that, will rise up, mop up your face, wash and anoint your face, and go out and look for a job. Go do something or start a business. Do something with your situation. I told you a story when I began that for 6 months I was wallowing in a pity party and I could not sleep. I was swimming in sweat because of fear and uncertainty about my life. But the day I was shaken to remember the value that was inside of me is the day that I rose up. And when I rose up and I look back, what God has done for me is many times more than what he had done for me up to that point. And I thank God for that, because what changed my life is that on that day I rose up and I got on the offensive and I took more control about my life with the assistance of God and his grace upon my life. So what can change your situation is when you are in a crisis, don't wallow in pity party. Rise up and be on the offensive. Do something about your situation. That is what will save you out of your life. You have all heard the story. It happened to me live. I was traveling with my family when coming from Namibia, and we passed through a portion of Botswana called between Maun and Nata. It's a long stretch, about 200-300 kilometer drive. And when we were on that long stretch, we got caught up in a storm. It was so thick and so heavy, we could not see. Even I was the driver, could not see a meter or 2 in front of me. And the kids began to cry in the car. And they suggested, let's park on the side of the road. And there were big trucks and everything that was parked on the side because they couldn't see the other drivers and cars. They parked on the side of the road because the storm was so huge. So when I saw that, I got the temptation to park on the side of the road like everybody else. But my heart told me, the Spirit of God inside of me told me, no, keep moving. So I slowed down And then I kept driving very slowly because I couldn't see well. I made sure that I remained in the road. The water and the hailstorms were pounding so heavily on me, but it took slower, but I kept moving. I kept moving and I kept moving. About 30 minutes continuously driving in the storm where I could not see anything. Eventually, the rain began to subside and subside and subside until it was completely cleared. And I moved on the side of the road and I parked and I looked back. And where we were, the sun was already beginning to shine. And when I looked back, I saw that the clouds were still thick where we were coming from. The storm was still on. Everybody that had remained who had parked on the side of the road were still on the side of the road. They were still in the middle of the storm. But us who kept moving, me and my family, because we kept driving, we were now on the other side of the storm. What helped us is that we did not stop in the storm, but we kept driving. So when you are in a storm, when you stop, you remain in the storm for a longer time. What saved us is that sunshine belongs to those that keep driving in the season of storm. Sunshine belongs to those that continue to drive in the season of the storm. So because we kept driving in the storm, we were the first ones to see the end of the storm. When we looked back, others remained there. We don't know for how long, but we celebrated because we're now in the sunshine. Same thing in our lives. Whatever you are going through, remain on the offensive. Rise up. Do something. What should you do? Trust God and move forward and move forward and move forward. Sunshine belongs to those that keep driving in the season of a storm. So if you want to see deliverance in your life, even in this pandemic or whatever is happening, don't stop. Keep moving forward, even if it's step by step. Remember, I said we slowed down our pace. We slowed down our speed so that we remain safe, but we kept moving. So even in this season, don't close your doors and close yourself up. Many people, when we were going through the pandemic, they closed their doors and stopped doing anything and stopped moving. But I kept working. I kept doing what I could. I could not travel as much as I could, but I kept working. And the good thing is that I can tell you, I made so much more progress financially and in many other ways during the pandemic than in any other time because of continuously and continuing to move even in a season of crisis. So I want you to know, sunshine belongs to those that will continue to drive in a season of storm. So don't stop when you are going through a season. Don't stop when you're going through a crisis, because when you stop, you will remain in the storm for a longer time. So doing nothing is not an option. The four lepers, they moved on and they went on the offensive and they eventually succeeded. If you go to the Bible again, to the book of Genesis chapter 26, and you go to verse 12, it tells the story of a man called Isaac. Now, I want you to know that today we call it a crisis. In other language, we call it a dark season. Just like we are talking about today about a dark season, I'm calling it a crisis. But when you go into the Bible, in the original language that they were speaking them, they spoke it in a different way. What we call a crisis, they called it a famine, because it was an agrarian culture. It was an agrarian economy where there were agronomists, there were farmers. So when there was a famine, it was a crisis for them. And also today, when we've got a pandemic, in the biblical terms, they would call it a plague. Now, if you go to the book of Genesis chapter 26 and verse 12, there was a crisis there. And in that crisis, in that season, there was a famine. But then the Bible says there is a man they called Isaac, the son of Abraham. He says, in a season of famine, Isaac sowed and he reaped 100-fold. And then the Bible says the man began to prosper, and he continued prospering until he became prosperous. The man began to prosper and he continued prospering until he became prosperous. And what caused him to prosper is because in a season of famine, Isaac sowed. Now, in a season of famine, you don't sit back and cry and say, there's no water, there's no rain, what am I going to do? And wallow again in a pity party. What saved Isaac was that in a season of crisis, he sowed. So I want to tell you, when you're going through a crisis, sow some seeds that you will harvest in good times. When you're going through a crisis, doing nothing is not an option. And the next thing I want to talk to you as well is that For you to be able to survive the dark seasons of our lives, I don't want us to speak only as a reactive situation, but I want you to be proactive, because as I've said to you, crisis is seasonal. As long as we are alive, we are bound to meet a crisis one way or the other. The nature of a crisis depends. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's our health. It comes in different ways. But whatever it is that we face as a crisis in our lives, we need to be able to have enough resilience in our lives for us to be able to survive it. Now, how do we build enough resilience? I want you to remember that in good times, you must learn to invest in deep and meaningful relationships. In good times, invest in good and meaningful relationships, because those are what will save you when you go through a dark season of your life. Remember, I've told you the story. When I was in the darkest moments of my careers, my wife helped me out, and she brought back again self-esteem and understanding of value in my life, and that saved my life, because I had a deep and meaningful relationship with a loved one, with my wife. Now, when times are good, there are many people that go partying and they kick the dogs and the cats and kick everybody because they are having a jolly good time. But I want you to know, when times are good, let's learn to invest in deep and meaningful relationships, because they will serve us good when we are at the lowest moments of our lives. And can I also say, we know with the advent of motivational speaking and entrepreneurship speaking, we are told about networking. And when we network, we are told, your value is dependent on the value of your networks. And in that process, they teach us to make all relationships transactional relationships, which means when I see you, I see a potential to advance my journey, money-making journey. But I want to encourage you, don't make relationships transactional relationships. Don't make them business relationships, but make deep and meaningful relationships. They will serve you for the good. They will help you, even whether it's business or any other way. But the starting point is that resist that temptation of making all networks and all relationships that you build transactional relationships. You only relate with somebody because you feel you will benefit something out of them. You never know where real benefit will come from. Some of the people that have saved me in my life are people that I least expected. And when I was relating with them, they probably were junior, and I never thought I would ever need anything from my junior. But when time was critical and I needed somebody to speak a word on my behalf, they came through for me. So learn to invest in deep and meaningful relationships when times are good, because they will do for you well when you go through a dark season of your life. So make relationships deep and meaningful, not transactional. Whether it's networking or anything, don't always think about a dollar figure that is going to come out of that relationship, but learn to invest deeply. Even those people that don't look important, even those people that look lowly, you never know when you will need them to speak a good word for you in your absence. Remember, most critical and important decisions of our lives are made in our absence, and you don't know who will make an input into that decision that is made in our absence. So you need to make sure that all relations that you have, they are not transactional, but they are deep and meaningful and out of respect. And the other point I want to say to you also, as we begin to move out of a crisis and reshape ourselves, most of us are coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. The world is slowly opening up, and we're saying, how do we find ourselves? How then do we move forward? I'm reminded of the story of Jesus Christ when he was sent a message by Martha and Mary, who were the sisters of Lazarus. They said to Jesus, your friend whom you love is sick. And when Jesus heard that story, got the message, he remained in that place for a long time, and he did not go back. He remained for 3-4 days until Lazarus died. And message came again, your friend is dead. Then he told his disciples, let's go, because the one that I love is now asleep. So when he went there, when you arrived at the family of Martha and Mary and Lazarus, he saw there was a crowd, and they were crying and mourning. And the sisters came to Jesus, and they said with a heartbreak, we thought you loved Lazarus. And they said, if you had been here earlier, Lazarus would not have died. That's what he said. They say, if you had been here earlier, Lazarus would not have died. Your presence would have kept him alive. But Jesus said, deliberately remain for a longer time. And so he responded in John chapter 11 and verse 40. He said something important that you must always remember, especially as we are coming out of the crisis. Because many of us are saying, Jesus, if you were there, we would not have gone through the corona pandemic. God, if you were there, we would not have gone through this dark season of our lives. If you forget everything that I have said today, I want you to remember this one thing. Jesus responded to the sisters, and he said in John chapter 11 and verse 40, did I not tell you that if only you will believe, you will see the glory of God? Now, that is what he said to the sisters. Did I not tell you that if only you will believe, you will see the glory of God? Now, as we come out of the crisis, or when you are seeing the tail end of the crisis, the only way to live beyond a crisis is to believe. Believe in the providence of God. Believe in miracles. Believe in God who's going to move you to the next stage of your life. If only you will believe, you will see the glory of God. That is what Jesus said. And when they believed in his words, he went on to resurrect Lazarus. They saw the glory of resurrection, because the miracle of resurrection, because they had believed. So for us to come out of a dark season of our lives, let's learn to believe. Learn to believe God for providence. Learn to believe God for a miracle. When I lost my job, and for so many months I was sweating, and my cloud was getting dark and dimmer, I taught myself every day, and I said, I'm going to wake up every day expecting a miracle, because one day the miracle will happen. I live every day expecting a miracle. So that is the principle of my life, even up to today. Every day I wake up expecting a miracle, and one day the miracle will happen. One day the miracle will come true. So can I encourage you today? Learn to believe. Believe in the providence of God. Believe that when you trust God, you will see the glory of God. So whatever situation you find yourself in, a crisis in a marital affair, a crisis in your marriage, a crisis in your health, a crisis in your job, a crisis in your finances, every day when you wake up in the morning, believe in a miracle, because one day your miracle will come through for you. Why? Because there's a God in heaven. He's watching over you, and it is important that you may learn to believe. So the most important thing, believe. Did I not tell you that if only you will believe, you will see the glory of God? And as I conclude, I'll just share two things, and then I will conclude. The last thing, this thing I've just told you, Jesus told Mary and Martha, if only you will believe, you will see the glory of God. Now, I want to encourage you, learn to believe God for a miracle. If you don't have a job, wake up every morning and trust God for a miracle. One day, the miracle will come through. I taught myself in that way, and I've learned to live from miracle to miracle to miracle, because I wake up believing God. I trust God for a miracle for all things pertaining my life, and God will never let you down. Learn to believe in a miracle, and one day you will see the glory of God. And I want to say this to you. When you are in a crisis, it's not what happens to you that matters, but it is how you respond to what happens to you that matters. So crises are bound to happen to each and every one of us. We have no option, because by definition, a crisis is a circumstance, a situation, or an event that happens to us that will destabilize or affect our lives in a negative way, but we have no control over it. You see, so crises are bound to happen, because to every one of us, I mean, there is no one who is immune to a crisis. Even though I've shared with you about crisis, it doesn't mean that I will never face any other crisis in life. They might still come. And I've said crisis can be personal, can be in a family, can be national, can be global. We can get affected in any way in this crisis. They are bound to happen, because they are events or circumstances that are outside of our control, but that impact us in a negative way. Now, crisis are bound to happen. So what is important is not what happens to you, but what is important is how you respond to what happens to you. You will know that even through this corona pandemic, while we were inside the houses and crying and afraid and running away under the blankets, running away from the virus, from an economic point of view, you know that the billionaires in the world, they come amassed more billions. And in all the countries of the world, including here where I live in Botswana, they raised more millionaires during the corona crisis than any other time. Why? Because for those that continue moving in a season of crisis, they will see sunshine, than those that pack in one place, that will remain in the storm for a longer time. So what is important when you experience a crisis or a dark season in your life is not the dark season itself, but it's how you respond. So learn to respond by believing and taking the offensive, moving forward. Remember, I spoke to you about the four lepers, that they moved forward. They did not stay in the same place. I spoke to you about Isaac, that he sowed in a season of crisis and he reaped 100-fold. Why? Because he believed and believed and believed for a miracle. So you remain in the same place because you don't sow a seed, you don't take the offensive, and you don't believe. And so you will stay in a crisis for a long time. So if you are going to survive beyond the dark season, 3 things. Number 1, do something. Take the offensive. Move forward. Number 2, sow seeds, something that will germinate and grow. And number 3, don't stop believing. So it's what you do that is important, not what has happened to you. Don't stop believing. Keep believing, but do something as you move forward. Do something as you move forward, and God will come through for you. And as I conclude, when you go through a crisis, stop listening to negative news that fuel fear in your life. In Botswana, we experienced the depth of the pandemic in July and August. Every social media, article that was being sent was talking about death. Somebody has died. I mean, I've never heard so many death news as I heard that time. And we get affected by the death messages of an uncle, of a cousin, of a friend, of a colleague, of somebody that we don't even know, that was posted on social media. We see that and then, corona is all over the place because the negative voices were magnified on television, on social news, on media, on live stream media. Everything was magnified and it brought fear into our lives. So I also began to feel with the family, we're in a crisis, we were tense, we were wondering, we're beginning to put things in place. In case I die, the kids must know where things are, the wife must know where things are, because the message is we're making us all feel like we are all on a queue going to the slaughterhouse, being slaughtered by coronavirus. When it became intense, I realized that everything was being magnified by an amplifier of the news and the media. So in June, July, I made a conscious decision that I'm going to stop watching news. And I told the family, we're not going to watch messages of dead people. If it's people that we know by a distance, we sympathize with those that have lost, but we're not going to be opening up messages about dead people so that we bring sanity to ourselves. For those that are close, we will do the necessary, to make sure that we stand with them. For those that we don't even know, we just make sure we close it there to protect ourselves and protect our sanity. Number 2, I stopped watching completely. I'm telling you the truth. I haven't watched the CNN News or Fox News or SABC News or ENCA since June, July. I've never opened up and watched anything up to today, like 6 months. And the truth is, I've never died. I'm alive and I've never watched the news. And I'm up to date. I have means of making sure that I stay up to date on news. I read the papers and I selectively read the things I need to know, whether it's economics or socially or politics, what is happening. So I am up to date on what is happening without necessarily sitting and absorbing negative news. So if you want to move forward out of a dark season, silence negative voices that fuel fear in your life. So I stopped watching news completely. Why? Because some months back I watched a documentary, by Michelle Obama, concerning her book Becoming Michelle Obama. So I watched that documentary because I had read the book and I wanted to just listen to her in words. And then when she was being interviewed, she said something important. She said that me and Barack says we don't watch any news that has got anything talking about us. Now when they were president, and she was the wife of the president, first lady, of the world, So they were on the news. Every news would talk about them. But here she was confessing that she doesn't watch any news that talks about it. So we are busy absorbing news about them, but they don't watch any news. I've always wondered how presidents, survive with all the negative attacks on social media and everything to them. How do they survive? And on that day, I learned they don't listen. They don't watch the news about themselves. They close themselves completely to anything. So I learned that, and even myself, I don't read any texts that are written to me that are negative. When somebody is complaining about me and saying so many things, I just delete and read. So I taught myself not to listen to negative news, whether it's about me, about the world, or about anything else. So anything that fuels fear in my life, I don't listen. If people send me clips or anything that fuel fear or self-doubt or that want to bring me down in my confidence or in any way, I don't listen. I just close it completely. I delete and read because it stops me from moving forward. So that is my advice. If you want to survive, stop listening, watching, or absorbing anything negative about yourself, about anything that affects you, or anything that fuel fear in your life, or that fuel that bring your sense of self-esteem down. Some of us, we struggle because there are so many voices that say, oh, you've got a black spot here, oh, you are too dark, oh, you are too slim, or you are too fat. They are negative voices. We hear them every day and they bring us down. So if you are going to survive in a dark season in your life, learn to close your ears from negative and your eyes from negative voices that fuel fear or self-doubt or negative self-esteem in your life. Close them because and only open yourself to things that speak positive about yourself. I'm not saying go around and do positive talk and positive thinking and stuff like that. No, what I'm simply saying is that look at things that will encourage faith in your life, belief in yourself, and moving forward, and you will survive. That, my brothers and sisters, will help you to move forward. As I close, let me just wrap up very quickly. This is how you respond if you're going to move forward out of a dark season. Number one, doing nothing is not an option. Rise up, do something, be on the offensive. Number two, sow seeds in that season of darkness. Sow some seeds, positive seeds, that you will be able to harvest something. Don't sit back, close yourself under the blanket and cry or have a pity party. That will not help you. Sow seeds that you will be able to harvest. In good seasons, in good times, always invest in meaningful relationships. Reinvest in meaningful relationship with your spouse, with your partner, with your family, children, parents, or people around you, friends, colleagues. In good times, learn to invest in deep and meaningful relationships. Don't make transactional relationships. Don't see a dollar figure, a dollar sign each time you look at me. Each time you network in a business arrangement and you exchange business cards, don't see another business deal. Don't avoid the temptation of seeing every relationship and every network and every person that you get to know as a business transaction. Let's learn to relate in a deep and meaningful way. And number four, believe, believe, believe. Don't stop believing. And lastly, don't listen to negative news that will fuel fear and a negative self-esteem in your life. Thank you very much. God bless you. Shalom, shalom. I trust you have learned something and we should be able to move on from there. God bless you.
Wow, 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 wow. I have no words, precisely because, I think as you went, it's been an hour, and, you were speaking to me every single second.
Amen.
And, one can actually be worried about certain elements without them knowing. But as you know, you start speaking, as you start sharing experiences, you start testifying, there was a lot that was being brewed inside me, and I do hope that those that were watching have been helped. Please, if you're in the comment section, and if there is something that you have been helped with, if you came to this session not feeling so confident, feeling hopeless, and now you feel a little bit hopeful, please write your testimony down in the comment section, because it will help someone else. Please do so. But I think you spoke about a lot of things, and I'm not going to pose a lot of questions, but if I'm just going to give it, let's say, 5 minutes of questions, if there are specific questions that would like to come in relation to the topic or anything that you have said. But I'm just going to pick on some of the things that I think that you have said, and that I just saw a lot of value in. And I think I'll just pick up from where you left off. I think the last thing that you said as you were ending was believe, believe, believe. And I think I like the Psalm of David when it says, I would have died had I not believed that I would see the hand of God in the land of the living. So it reminds us of the importance of belief. But I have a question on that, to say, how does one practically do so to believe in times of crisis? Because we see that often at times, even when we try to believe, and I think a good example that we see is to say, you spend 10 minutes in prayer, and right when you are in prayer, you are believing God for a result, you are believing God for a miracle. But the moment you actually, say amen, the words that you are saying, the actions that follow, do not resemble, the fact that you believe. So how do you practically believe in times of crisis? But how does, belief convert into practice? And I think that is the most important thing, where belief now is converted into positive practice towards, when you speak of it, you say slowly driving on so that you see yourself out of crisis.
Yeah, that's an interesting one and a very important one, Brother Freddie. In that, if you see okay, before I get them, in our Shona language, there's that statement we used to say it just before exams all the time, which says "Mombe aikorere pa market." It means the cow does not get fat on the market day when it's about to be sold. So by the time it comes to the market, it's already fat. So we used to say this when you're about to get into an exam, because we're saying you don't suddenly become intelligent on the day of the exam. On the day of the exam, you just reveal what you have been studying and what you've been working through over a period of time. And how does it relate to what we say now? So that's why you remember when I spoke about even relationships, I said invest in deep and meaningful relationships when times are good. So you don't start investing in good, deep and meaningful relationships only when you're in a crisis already. It's too late. So we need to learn when times are good. So the same thing with believing. You will see what God would say to the children of Israel when they were crossing the Jordan River or the Red Sea. He would say to them, well, when the waters have parted, when you are crossing, you will see big stones there. He says you must carry them, and then from the middle of the sea, and you put them on the other side. And when the waters part, your children later on, they will ask and say, what are those stones? And then you will say, those stones are stones which we picked in the middle of the sea. They are stones of testimony to say one day God parted the waters, and then we lifted them out, and then we've put them there, so that when you see the rivers, you may not believe that we walked through this path, but there will be stones of testimonies to show that God once did it for us. Now, what is important is that as we walk through our life, God brings seasons of testimonies in our lives. He gives us success in little things. And in all the things that God does for us, if you look at the patriarchs, the forefathers, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, what they used to do, every time God did something for them, the first thing they would do, they would build an altar, and then they would thank God. So all those altars, they would always come back to them, because there were signs and the reminders and milestones to show that God did something for them in the past. So they would always work as a reminder. So now when we come back to your question of saying, how do we in a practical way believe? So believing starts by looking at the things we have done, God has done for us in the past. So you will say, God, what you did for us in the past, you are able to do it for us even today again. So belief will always come with a reference point. Now, when I teach about faith and trust, you will see when you go into the Word of God, let me open it up so that we can understand each other nicely. So when you go into the Word of God, you will see that in the Old Testament, you don't see the word faith a lot, but you see the word trust in the Lord. And when you go into the New Testament, don't see the word trust a lot, you see the word faith. Even though these words are almost the same, they go hand in hand. But what is the difference between faith and trust? Now, trust is based on reference point. God in the Old Testament will show himself, prove himself first before people can believe in him. That's why people like Gideon, before they can move, they will come to God and say, fleece test. When I wake up in the morning, the fleece must be wet, the dry must be ground. The following day, the fleece must be dry, the ground must be wet. They were testing God. So God would have to prove himself before people would believe him. That's in the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, Jesus says, blessed is he who believes before he sees. So faith now is defined as the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So the difference between faith and trust is that trust is based on a reference point from the past, whereas faith is based on believing before it is done. Now, when we are talking about us to be able to believe practically, it means we bring in an element of trust where we begin to look at what God has done for us in the past. The things that if God protected me through the pandemic, surely you will take me through to the end of this year. When you're having a flu today, you can say, God, if you saved me through that virus and I got positive and I lied in bed for 2 weeks and you healed me there, surely you can heal me of any other condition. And for myself, I say, God, if you helped me in those days when I lost my job and you lifted me up from the deep miry clay, there's nothing else that is like that can make me again. Because if you did it for me in the past, you can also did it for me in the future. Amen. So belief.
Amen. It reminds me.
God has done in the past.
Yeah. It reminds me of the scripture, and even if when scripture refers, it refers to the past, it says the same spirit, and then it refers to a past event that resurrected Jesus Christ from the dead is able then to revitalize your mortal body. They overcame by the word of their testimony, as well accompanied by their faith. So I think very, very important point that you are raising there to say, when we were singing, when we were young, we used to sing, count your blessings, name them one by one, count your very blessings, na 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 na. But we didn't realize how important is that process was, because it is to take stock of what he is doing, knowing that once you have a full view of what he has done and what he's capable of doing, it gives you that light that you are looking for in the midst of darkness. Because I think it's very difficult to see that light when it's dark, but as you reflect and see what he has done and is able to do, it gives you that brink of light that gives you hope. So I think it's a very, very important point that you are raising. I have another question, and before maybe I go to that question, D. Brian Dube saying, thank you so much for this wonderful session. My life has been revolutionized. I am revived, feeling new, strengthened from deep within. God bless you. So a message coming for D. Brian Dube. If you have a testimony, please, or have kind words, type them in the comment section. The question is this, a man is blind in the Bible, and the disciples come to Jesus and say, why is this man blind? Is it his mother or father that sinned that he should be this way? And the answer is to say that he is this way so that the glory of God might be shown upon his life. Then there is also another case, you see, Joseph from pit to prison, from prison to, many tribulations in his journey, starting from just being thrown into the pit by his brothers. But all this happening so that one day he might be a governor that then leads the children of Israel into survival. My question is to say, can crisis sometimes have, hidden blessings? Can it have hidden lessons? And how do we find courage? I think it's courage to be able to see those blessings in the midst of darkness. How do we have wisdom to be able to open our eyes and say, understand? I mean, wisdom to understand the times and the lessons engraved. And I think the last thing is to say, yeah, just the understanding. How do we understand and be able to see beyond what just seems as darkness?
That's right. It's a very important question that you're raising, and I'm sure we have heard it many times that there is no testimony without a test, and we have also heard that there is no resurrection without crucifixion. So you will find that the situations that we go through, the most important, it's almost like the point I've raised when I said what is not important is not what we go through, but how we respond to what we go through. The next portion of it says what is important is not what we go through, but what we become after we have gone through that. Because how we respond to the situation will then turn us to become a different type of people. So what we become out of the situation, you've cited the story of Joseph. Remember, Joseph was a pampered boy. His brothers would go out to take care of the cattle and the animals for the father. He would stay close by the father. And when his brothers were making their own clothes to put on, the father would make a coat of many colors for Joseph. He was loved and pampered, but he had destiny upon his life. His destiny was to become a king, according to a leader, according to the visions that he had seen. But a leader, Papa's little boy, cannot become a leader. The spoiled brat in the house cannot become a leader. So God needed to bring out Papa's little boy out of Joseph and bring in the leader, the president in him. So that is why he had to go down, 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 down. He had to suffer betrayal by his own brothers. He had to suffer being forgotten, in prison. I mean, if you have suffered those, there is nothing else that will ever break you. If you have been betrayed by those that you love, if you have been forgotten by those that you have helped the most in their lives, if you have been lied on, just like by Potiphar's wife, and you survive those, there is nothing else in life that will ever break you. So sometimes the crises that we go through, they make us into better people. I was an intelligent student in school from grade 1 to grade 7. I was top of the class, getting prizes and everything all the time. And from Form 1 to Form 6, exactly the same thing. I never missed a beat in my academic life. And when I went into university in second year, I failed dismally and I had to repeat. It was the first time I'd ever failed. It was the beginning of the crisis. And I eventually went through, and then I got into this one, which I shared earlier about losing my job, because everything had been fine. And I was like on a conveyor belt, being pushed forward. But it never built character in me, because everything was like on a silver plate. But the failing in university, that losing of my job, it threw noise out of my life completely. And my bearings, I couldn't pick up. But from then onwards, I learned to be in control, to be in charge, and to believe God for things, and to know that in life you are on your own. So crises, they shape us and they prepare us for the destiny that God has put in our life. So when we go through crisis, yes, we need to always introspect. Sometimes we go through situations because of our folly, our foolishness, the things that we've done, wrong choices, wrong decisions in life. But even though we've gotten into crisis because of our wrong choices and wrong decisions, we always need to train ourselves to learn something out of those crises. Sometimes we make mistakes. Like I heard when we were going through the pandemic, the coronavirus, people were saying, is this way of God punishing us? Is that God speaking to us something? Is God saying something? But I say, but God does not work like an ancestral spirit that make you sick for it to get your attention, to speak to you or make a kid sick. God does not speak in that way. God speaks to us and works to us in ways, but there are things that he allows. When we've gone through them, they shape our lives and prepare us for destiny. So when we look at crisis, yes, don't just say God punishing us. God doesn't work like that. But what we always need to learn to see is, what am I learning out of this crisis, whether it is because of my own folly, the decision I've made, or it's because somebody else, like the ship was sinking because Jonah was on the boat. So sometimes the ship sinks because a wrong person is on board.
Powerful.
So things like that happen in our lives. But when they happen, the important thing is, what am I learning and what am I becoming after this season?
Yeah, I think you remind me of a story that I once heard of these, two twins. One that was an alcoholic, and one that did not want to see alcohol at all. And when the two were asked, why the first one to be asked, why are you an alcoholic? And he says, my father was an alcoholic, so I became. And the non-alcoholic was asked, why are you a non-alcoholic? And he says, my father was an alcoholic, so I became. So which means to say, it is the way that we respond, as you are saying. But there's an interesting point, because the children of Israel are in the desert for 40 years, right? And then a man by the name Joshua, is resurrected to then take them into the promised land. And I like that concept also of a change in mind, a transformation in the way we think, in the way we do things, a new ideology. And I think there's a tendency when crisis comes to try and rectify it using old ways, and sometimes we come unstuck. Can you speak to us a little bit about that?
I think that's a good one as well, because I've been speaking and speaking and speaking to many people in the past few weeks, and saying when we've been going through the coronavirus pandemic, so much has changed. And as we say, it's a new norm that we find. But with where we are now, to a great extent, most of the countries have opened up. But what we see, even in the churches, is not a reset where we're beginning to do things differently. Is a restart, trying to do things the same way that we were doing before the pandemic. And so I keep saying, the moment we do that, we are missing the point completely. Because with what we have gone through, we need to have opened our eyes to see that we are in a new season. So much has been reset. So we cannot do things the old way again. We need to begin to see what is the opportunity of where we are. Don't try to push the restart button. We are in a reset mode. Things are different now, but everybody's pushing to try to do things the way we have done them in the past. And the moment we do that, what it automatically means, it means that past 2 years were a completely wasted 2 years. We didn't learn anything. They didn't benefit us anything. We are restarting and taking over from 2019 when everything started all over again. But how I wish we could all open our eyes and realize that the world has changed. Let's restart. Let's reset. And start at a different level and at a higher level. Similarly, when the example that you bring, when Joshua comes in, he doesn't do things the way Moses was doing them. It's a fresh new beginning, and he takes the children of Israel to the next stage of their lives. And when they get there, God continuously brings new leaders to take them to the next stage. And I believe that as a people, we are at a different level. Let's not try to push to do things the way we did them 2 years ago. Let's realize where we are, that it's a new season, and let's begin to take advantage of the season that we are in, because the world has changed. The world has shifted. And those that pull the strings and control from a worldly way, they already know what they're trying to achieve, and they've already moved forward. While to a great extent, the church and many of us are still trying to go back to our old ways and restart the things that we were doing 2 years ago. And that, it means it's a wasted 2 years that we've had. But I wish we could all understand that's a different world. Let's not restart. Let's reset and do things. Let's see the opportunities and the seasons of where we are.
Yeah, I guess you speak to that concept. We say, learning, relearning, but also most importantly, unlearning. Because and I think that third part is very important, is very difficult. I myself, even in the workplace, it's where I think the season and coronavirus, as you rightfully said, it demanded of us to be agile. It demanded of us to be resilient. And these are not easy things to do. And one is tempted to want to go back and do it the way that they used to, do it. And I think you put it right to say, we need to reset. We need to not restart, but to reset. And that speaks to new ideology. And I think from a practical point of view, it is to read around to see what is available as resources to me, to search for advice, and I think still also on that same point, I just wanted to pick up especially this, to search for advice, because then there's sources of advice. And just pick on something that you mentioned. I think when you mentioned two people that then became destiny enhancers, your wife saying, wake up, don't you see that you are not seeing the people that, the person that other people see, and your friend that also came and said, whatever you do, keep on holding on. And I just want to bring on this notion. Remember, I was saying, just trying to link it when we go and search for your advice, the word, the importance of the word that is brought into your life and how it sustains you. In brief, can you just speak to that as an isolated factor, to say the word that it keeps you, the word that preserves you, and its source, and how important that is?
Yeah. So two things I want to share there. Number one is exactly as you put it, that it is very important who is speaking into your life, because many people become failures in their lives or struggle even out of the crisis because they have got wrong voices speaking to their lives. They surround themselves with mentors and coaches who have failed or are struggling also in their lives. And so they are never going to be able to tell them things that move forward. So what is important is that you must have voices that are speaking into your life, that are understanding, the what you're going through, and also that are understanding the value that you bring on the table, so that are not trying to do you down, or that are not trying to take advantage of you. Because sometimes when you're going through a crisis, we become vulnerable. So we have got people that come as if they want to help us, but in the process taking advantage of our crisis, because we are desperate. We need resources. For ladies, you want something, and for somebody flex money to help you in your situation because they know you are an easy picking. You are an easy fruit that can easily take by simply flaking some cheap stuff around you. So it is a very important, when we go through a crisis season, that we make sure that we remain with our feet on the ground. We don't become emotional about things, and also we choose clearly who is speaking into our lives. Don't let somebody who's failing in a certain area speak to you in that area, because they will always feel, and they'll be lighter on you in that area, because they also know that they are failing in that specific area. Let's surround ourselves with independent voices, and let's have voices that speak out of true experience, and when they have succeeded, out of true learnings. There are many people today, you see, there are lots of motivational speakers that go read books and then they stand and then they advise you out of what they have learned, and that will never hold. What holds the most is when people speak out of experience, when they speak out of what they've gone through and what they've achieved in their lives. So when people are going to, even for me, I will only allow people to speak to my life that have the experience of having gone through that, what they're talking about. People that are not married coming to me and say, I want to teach you marriage. And then the second point I want to speak to each and every one of us is that what will keep you in life is your assignment. So it is very important that each and every one of us be clear about our assignment in life, because even when we go through the corona pandemic, I'm not saying it out of arrogance or anything, but I was not afraid the whole way, and I thank God that God kept me, preserved me, and I survived without having being positive or sick or going down. But I kept moving. I never really stopped in business and everything. My life just continued to move. And what I kept saying to myself and to everybody that are around me is that as long as I'm still on track with my assignment, I cannot die. I will live to declare the goodness of the Lord. You see, I will only die when my assignment is finished, or when I sidetrack and begin to do things that are irrelevant. I'm no longer adding value to the assignment that I have. So even when we go through crisis, whatever crisis that we go in through our lives, like I've said, we should not just look at crisis, the corona. And some people on the platform today are going through different crises, even marital or health, etc. So I want to say, it's your assignment, that you have in your life that will keep you and preserve you, no matter what crisis you go through. The assignment. So it's important that every one of us, we get to a place of identifying the assignment, because that is what will keep us alive to the day that we die. The moment we sidetrack, we are outside of the assignment or it's done, then that is it. You will see, if you look at the life of Jesus, about 5 times they tried to kill Jesus. They even brought him to the edge of the cliff so that they can throw him down, but he just walked away. And a few times they did all the things. 5 times they got him to the place of death, but they would never kill him. And why? But they only killed him on the cross. Why did he die on the cross? Because even himself, he says, it is finished. The assignment was finished. Before the assignment was finished, they would not touch him. Look at the life of Paul. Exactly the same thing. Many times they would beat him to the point of death. They would scourge him. They would do all sorts of things and send him to prison. But because the assignment was not yet complete, he would never die. They could only kill him, and he only died at the end in prison after the assignment had completely been finished. So what is key and the secret to life and to staying alive in a crisis, and also to staying alive in our life when you fly, when you drive your car, when you go through difficult situations and dangerous points in your life, when you are confronted with the robbers and hijackers in your life, what will keep you alive? That will cause them, the accident or the hijackers or the robbers, not to kill you. Assignment. So understand your assignment, stay true to that assignment, and you will stay alive.
I have heard the speaker say, your gift will create room for you. And I guess today the message that we are hearing is to say your assignment will create room for you. Very important. I also just wanted to pick on, the last point that you mentioned. At some point in time, I lead a student Christian organization. I used to lead at Rhodes University. One of the students approached me and said, I want you to be my spiritual father, just going back to that point of saying, the right people to speak to you at the right capacity. I just want to bring this as a sharing, but my response was to say, no, I wouldn't and I couldn't, because I don't know what that means, and I couldn't and I wouldn't because maybe I'm not at that point in time. What I could offer you is guidance. What I could offer you is maybe mentorship, and maybe that is what you are looking for. Let's not delve into these things that we don't as much, that I don't as much understand. And I just wanted to bring that point, that even as the one that is being approached, when you feel as if something is, far beyond you, if the ask is beyond, always you have other means to either redirect to the right person that might be able to help. For example, I think you gave an issue about marriage counseling. When you're not married, there are many people that are marriage counselors by profession that can actually do that to the best of their ability. So being authentic to self, to say, this is outside my scope of work, this is something that I cannot do, but if anything, this is what I can offer you. Silver and gold have I not, but what I have I will give you. Stand up and walk. So also being authentic and being true to what you have. I think the last question before I just read the comments is, we've been talking about, as we go get towards the other side of the crisis, the other side of dark times, what is there to expect? Maybe someone is in the comment section and they're asking, what should I expect to see? What is on the other side of the mountain? What is on the other side of darkness? Can you just briefly speak to that? And I trust this will be my last question, and we will let you go.
The other side of the mountain and the other side of darkness is the sunshine. And remember, what is important when we go through a crisis is not the crisis itself, but it's what you become. When you come out of it, when you have learned resilience,
powerful.
Persistence and perseverance, you come out of that person, the other side, a person that cannot be broken. There is a word that I learned recently, is called anti-brittle. So we know something that is brittle is like a glass. You break it, you put it on the ground, it shatters and it breaks completely. Anti-brittle is when you take something and like putty or rubber, that jelly, that you drop it on the ground, it doesn't break, but it changes its shape. If it was one shape, it splatters, it changes its shape, but remains intact.
Yeah, powerful.
So that is anti-brittle, which means it falls and changes shape but does not break. So that is what a crisis does. A crisis must build that anti-brittleness inside of us, that it changes us and leaves us in a better state, that it brings, they call it a plastic transformation, where we are stretched to a level that we cannot be returned back to the original state. So for my own personal life, all the different crises, I cannot share them all. There are so many that I've gone through. They've always left me a better person. I was Papa's little boy. The system of the education, etc., pushed me through. Everything was very easy. In those years, Zim was still good and everything was like pushing us forward. You don't have to make many choices. But when crisis began to come in, they began to train me how to make choices. They began to train me how to not over-trust when you interact with people. They began to train me to say failure is not final. You can fail and then you rise up, and when you fall, always fall forward. Rise up when you are on a step forward ahead from you. So what I want to say in response to your question is that what is on the other side? It's a new you, a different you, a better you. It's sunshine. Somebody who has been built and changed, and they call them battle hardened. They are battle hardened so much that there is no season or crisis that can move you and shake you anymore. When you are battle hardened and battle toughened, like Joseph, because of the crisis that he went through, when he was at the top as the prime minister of Egypt in a foreign land, I'm sure there was so much negative talk against him being a foreigner, in that land and being at the top. But the battle hardening that he had gone through prepared him for that position. He became a better person, a bigger. His shoulders were expanded. So at the other end of the darkness that we are going through at a personal level or even as nations is greater sunshine and a better people with broader shoulders and the people that are anti-brittle, that are not the same shape, but that are a better and a permanent state. Amen.
Yeah, powerful. I mean, David is in the wilderness and he is shepherding his father's flock. He meets a lion, he rips it apart. He meets a bear, he rips it apart. But all that is training him for Goliath. And I think that we are being trained, we are being trimmed, we are being strengthened. And this is your message to us today. Tendai Chihobo, thank you for the powerful sharing. Gladys Rumbidzai Mashate, after today, our lives will never be the same. Thank you for the life-changing word. Fair Chance Move, great discussion, Freddie Mashate and Peter. Please check out Ziwani, and he put a link there. Group if you are not already involved in the initiative. So there's a link that has been put there. We will check it afterwards. But I think it is, messages of thanks, messages of appreciation, messages of revival that have been coming through to us. And at this note, I just want, to thank you. And, as I'm thanking you and as I was listening to all the things that you have been saying, I'm reminded, and again, I love David because I think David is a good example of, a man that went through it all but remained standing. And I think the other thing that just excites me is, a man that is called a man after God's heart. What kind of man is that? And one, goes searching. And he says that I was young and now I'm old, and never have I seen, the righteous forsaken or their seed begging for food. And I think that is, a good place for me to then just, end with that comment. But just to say thank you. Thank you very much for the time. It's almost 2 hours now, and I did not anticipate this. But we've been on this platform for almost 2 hours. If you're just joining us, please go back to the beginning. There's so much. But when you're going back, don't go back alone. Go back with a notebook, take notes, learn from it, and learn, relearn. Very, very important. So thank you very much, Baba. We appreciate your time, appreciate your wisdom, appreciate the knowledge that you have shared. And I think it has made us better people. And I guess I'm speaking for everyone when we say that we are revived and we are changed.
Amen.
Thank you. And yes. And with that, I'm just going to say good night. May God bless you. May God keep you. May He bless and keep you and yours. Everything that is called by your name, may it be blessed. May it be enlarged. May your territory be enlarged. May your, your everything that is attached to you be enlarged. And I believe that God is going to do great and marvelous things. He's in the habit of doing that. So good night and have a blessed evening further.
Amen. God bless.